Strap in, boys, this could be an interesting one. So this season's almost came to an end, and for a number of teams it's been a very difficult year. Spurs, another team in which I could look to make a video on later once the season's finished, could be looking at potentially relegation or another season finishing 17th. Barcelona have been dunked out the Champions League by Atletico after getting a red card in both legs. Real Madrid are in complete turmoil. Chelsea seem to be looking at LinkedIn for managers. And just God forbid all of us that Arsenal actually win the league. But I think one of the teams who has definitely had it the worst this season has to be Leicester City, because when you truly deep and understand their situation, they potentially have done irreparable damage. So, just for a bit of side context, Leicester were promoted from the Championship in 2014. By 2016, they had somehow won the Premier League at 5,000 to 1 odds. One of the greatest fairy tale stories ever. Claudio Ranieri led a team spearheaded by Jamie Vardy, N'Golo Kante, Riyad Mahrez, Wes Morgan, Kasper Schmeichel to a Premier League title. Something that I think we can all agree probably won't be seen again in our lifetimes. But it wasn't just that. In 2020 and 2021, Leicester would finish 5th in the Premier League twice in 2 seasons under Brendan Rodgers, and they would pick up an FA Cup win in 2021 alongside a Community Shield following the start of the next season. They would feature in Europe 3 times across this consistent stint in the Premier League, once in the Champions League and twice in the Europa League. And during their time there, they ranked up a lot of money. All of the following players were sold for at least €30 million during this time period. This includes Harry Maguire, Wesley Fofana, Riyad Mahrez, Ben Chilwell, James Maddison, Harvey Barnes, Danny Drinkwater, N'Golo Kante and Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall. Maguire and Fofana were both sold for either over or pushing €80 million. And none of those players were massive signings for Leicester. They didn't spend a load of money on these players, they were massive amounts of profit. However, in 2023, Leicester ended up finishing in the relegation zone and ended up in the Championship. It's fine though, in 2024 they'd win the Championship outright and come straight back up, and then in 2025 they'd go straight back down.
Oh, for Christ's sake!
However, the unthinkable thing that has happened is that in 2026, Leicester have been relegated again to League One. And this is where the problems start to arise, because every single thing you can possibly look at regarding Leicester right now is a mess. There's no other way to describe it, there's no other thing you could say, there's no sugarcoating it. It's a mess, Leicester are a mess, everything's a mess. Let's start with the playing squad, because this team is nowhere near bad enough to be relegated from the Championship. They currently have certain players on the book such as Asmir Begovic, Hamza Chowdhury, Ricardo Pereira, Harry Souttar, Yannick Vestergaard, Jamal Lascelles, Luke Thomas, Harry Winks, Joe Aribo, Oliver Skipp, Bobby Decker-Dover-Reid, Steffi Mavividi, Jordan Ayew and Patson Daka. This team, there is just no reason in which they should be getting relegated from the Championship. It's not on. Now, this isn't a great Leicester team. In fact, I don't think this is a team that should be getting promoted. But to be relegated, to even be in a relegation fight, no. There's too many good players here. A lot of those players were signed when Leicester were a Premier League team and were given contracts when Leicester were in the Premier League, and this is where the biggest issue comes in. Leicester were actually relegated with getting a 6-point deduction this season for breaching financial rules. If Leicester didn't get this deduction, they would have survived only just by 1 point, and West Brom would have went down instead, along with Oxford City and Sheffield Wednesday. And when you deep that it was a points deduction based on financial mismanagement, it really doesn't look good when you look through that lens a little bit more in detail. Leicester next season are going to be playing in League One. The average salary in League One is around about £4,000 a week for a player, which means some players will be on a lot more and some will be on a lot less. Now, I've looked through who the highest earner in League One currently is, and this information is quite tricky and quite difficult to actually find, so please take these with a pinch of salt and bear with me. Now, if we exclude players who are A, on loan from another team, so their wages will be skewed because the League One side will only be paying part of those wages, and B, if we exclude a lot of players who are at Cardiff right now, who have been promoted, won't be in League One next season, and Cardiff only came down for 1 year and have went straight back up. So if we exclude Cardiff City players and we exclude players on loan, according to the information I've been able to find online, the highest paid player is currently Alfie May at Huddersfield on around £15,000 a week. Now, this information could be slightly skewed, but it's the best of what I can find. So let's assume that that information is in fact true. That means that Leicester's, let me just add these numbers up correctly here, 17th highest paid player will be the joint highest paid player in League One next season. Again, take all of this with a pinch of salt, because this information, might be slightly incorrect. Clubs don't go around posting factual information on how much all their players get paid to the easily accessible public. But from the information that I've been able to find, that is what the numbers come out at. And when you look a bit deeper into those, it's even worse. Leicester's 5 highest paid players include centre midfielder and former Premier League consistent player Harry Winks, who after a 1-0 loss to Portsmouth towards the end of the season was seen leaning out of the team coach, screaming at the fans to F off. You have 32-year-old right-back Ricardo Pereira, who signed for Leicester when they were at the peak of their Premier League powers. His contract does not have long left if it doesn't expire at the end of this season, and I cannot see him not going back to Portugal or maybe Spain. The point is, he's definitely leaving Leicester. £20 million signing striker Patson Daka, who accumulated at best 5 goals this season. You have Danish centre-half Yannick Vestergaard, who was also signed when Leicester were in the Premier League from Southampton. And Hamza Chowdhury, who I'm led to believe the Leicester fans are really not that keen on. Now, what are Leicester going to do? If you were to ask someone who didn't fully understand how the transfer system in football works, they would probably say the obvious. Well, Leicester will just sell all of these players on massive wages and buy in new players. That is a great idea on paper, but in practice it's very, very, very difficult. And to understand that, you need to understand how these wages actually work. So I'm going to give an example. Let's pretend that in the summer coming up, both Sunderland and, let's pick, Lille, both want to sign player X. Both of these teams offer 20 million to player X's club, and player X's club accepts. It's now down to contractual negotiations. Sunderland are in an interesting position because they play in the Premier League. The Premier League is one of the most competitive leagues in the world, and there are only a small handful of teams who can truly sit there at the start of the season and say there is just no chance we get relegated. Tottenham are proving that that list might be smaller than you actually realise. If you are a team who accepts that there is a chance that if things go wrong you could get relegated this season, you will include things called relegation clauses into players' contracts, and this basically means that if the club is relegated, the player agrees to take a lesser wage. Now, you can't spur this onto players 2 years into a contract where this wasn't agreed at the start. So, how will this work? Well, when player X sits down with both clubs, Sunderland will offer £60,000 a week, but if the club is relegated, the player's wage will drop to £30,000 a week. Lille will offer £45,000 a week with no relegation clause, because Lille play in France, and Lille are one of the teams in France who under no circumstances expect to be relegated. They're both shopping in the same player pool, but they're both in widely different situations. This is because of the disparity in money between top leagues in the world. England is out of control in terms of money, and this is where players get into a situation where they have to pick. If you go to Sunderland and survive, you will get more money. If you go to Sunderland and fail, you will get less money. If you go to Lille, you take out the chance to earn more or less, but you have a flat sum that won't go anywhere. Now, there's lots of different variations about how this can work and blah 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 blah, but in effect, that is how this technically works. Now, Leicester may have had some relegation clauses in their players' contracts going from the Premier League down to the Championship. That I would kind of expect. Their wages are naturally a bit higher for that anyway, but Leicester would not have been a team that would have expected to get relegated. So they just as easily could have had almost no relegation clauses in their players' contracts. What they definitely won't have is relegation clauses for players going from the Championship to League One, so they effectively have to shift these players. Now, because the players are on massive wages, clubs are not going to pay a premium price for these players because they know they're going to have to put a massive wage across. It's reported that Harry Winks is on £90,000 a week. Now, let's say that Leicester accept any offer that comes in. Let's pick a random club. Watford offer £1.5 million. In the grand scheme of things, that's not a lot of money. Leicester are already under a financial microscope. They can't afford to spend the vast majority of that money straight back into their squad. But let's say they accept it anyway to try and get Harry Winks off the wage bill. Watford offer £30,000 a week and say that's our final offer. Now, on the one hand, you would expect Harry Winks would say, yes, I'll accept that, get me out of League One. On the other hand, he might not accept that. He could choose to say, I'm not accepting any contract below £60,000 or £70,000 a week and just sit at Leicester for a year. Now, if Leicester end up in this position, it's quite a predicament because it means they can't get rid of these players and they certainly can't afford to keep them. So the only thing left that they can do is try and loan these players out for a year and get another club to pay part of their wages, as much as they can get them to pay. Because ultimately, if you can't motivate a lot of these players who are names that would be associated with either the Premier League or the top end of the Championship to play in the Championship, it's going to be extremely hard to motivate them in League One. And these players clearly are not playing for pride at Leicester, otherwise they wouldn't be in this position in the first place. So what do Leicester do? What are Leicester going to do? It's hard to really tell. You can't shift 15 players and bring 15 new ones in unless you're in a strong financial position. Leicester aren't doing that, and even if you do that, sometimes you have to take a season's hit for all these players to bed in. Leicester need out of League One, and they need out of League One immediately. And if they don't get some big offers to come in for some of these players, or if there aren't contracts about to run out so Leicester can shift massive parts of their wage bill, they could be in serious trouble. It's another example of the money being spent at the top end of England being absolutely out of control and completely disconnected from the rest of the pyramid. But what do you guys think? I'd be really keen to hear your guys' opinion. Please let me know in the comments below. Is this a salvageable situation for Leicester? Are they beyond saving? Thank you to everyone who's made it this far into the video, and I will see everybody in the next.